Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. We are once again looking at about Book 6. Today we're dealing chapter 6 of Book 6, Book 6, where we now turn into focusing on oligarchies, establishing oligarchies. Now, these next two chapters, I think, is going to be discussions of oligarchies. So let's go turn to it. How should one do this in connection with oligarchies? Is very nearly evident from the things from these things as well. In other words, in the previous chapter he was talking about talking about how you preserve democracies, not by taking them to their extreme of the principle, democratic principle, but rather moderating it. Things to avoiding the unstable aspects of extreme democratic principle of the nature of the democratic popular rule, things that are detrimental in popular rule, and by implication, he indicates the same this thing through oligarchy. So, even though the focus, the previous chapters were on democracy, but he also at many times there talked about oligarchy and aspects of oligarchic rule as well as contradiction, because this is the thing. Remember, oligarchy and democracy are kind of opposites of each other in that sense. So now, therefore, what he said about this is what he said about democracy is also a little bit true, and it will be also true about how you establish oligarchies, particularly if you want them to preserve last longer, not just merely to come into being, but also being able to last. Right. Each sort of oligarchy should be combined out of opposing elements, reasoning in relation to the sort of democracy opposite. So there's each type of regime is kind of like democratic. They're kind of opposite, and therefore we should look at this. As the nature of democratic regime becomes extremely more democratic at the last, the same thing is true with the oligarch regime or oligarch, both leading to kind of a tyranny, right? The tyrannical forms. The first and most well blended of sorts of oligarchy is related to the first sort of democracy. In other words, this one, this is the one that is very close to so-called regime. The so-called regime called regime. Now, polity is as again. Remember this. We said the polity is really in the Greek is politeia. Politeia is both constitution or regime, and hence this is the regime called regime. Right? He's saying this is therefore there's something. The first democracy and the first oligarchy are both kind of similar to this thing called politeia. Okay, this is okay. That's interesting. So therefore, this is that element. In this, there should be a distinction. In this, there should be a distinction among assessments, some being lesser and others great. In other words, there need to be a distinction of assessments. What are assessments? Remember, assessments are the the basis by which you're going to decide who can participate, who cannot participate, who can participate, who can be a citizen, who cannot be a citizen, and then of the citizens, who can hold what sort of office. In other words, it becomes assessments. The question is there should be some being lesser assessments and others being greater. On the basis of the lesser, they will take part in the necessary offices. On the basis of the greater, in the authoritative offices, in other words, the ruling offices. So therefore, the necessary offices, the various offices that are necessary for the regime, but we distinguish between the necessary offices, the offices that are essential for the regime to operate. These what the lesser assessments. Okay, in other words, therefore they in the offices that are necessary for the regime, these are going to be lesser assessment as long as you meet the requirements. But for the ruling officers, those who are doing this, the assessment should be better. That only not everyone can obtain it, right? It should be open to anyone possessing the assessment to take part in the regime, bringing in through the assessments as many as people as it will allow them to be superior to those not taking part. Again, you need to be careful. You need to make sure you have a majority. Okay, you need to have it so that those that are not going to take part are going to be few, not many. If if they're the majority of the city, that's an unstable situation. And they should always take from the better part of the people, those who are to be sharers in the regime. So therefore, you should look at other people in there, of the populations, which of the better people. In other words, remember of the notables of the people. Remember we discussed in the book earlier part of 4:4 about the different types of people, the different types of multitude, and which are better and which are worse. Remember, he privileges the farmer and the herder at the expense of the mere labor. The mere physical labor seems to be the most vulgar and the most dangerous. The ones who have nothing but their body, the ones that, and the very poor, and against the ones who are very poor, who have nothing, who are these are the ones who are said to be slavish and therefore dangerous. The slavish, if remember that's it back all the way back in 3. He defended the idea that the many could be better judges than the one who, either the few or even the one wise one. But the exception to that is that they could not be overtly slavish. So the danger here is that the very poor, the poor who are so poor that they are slavish. They as book 4, chapter 11 indicates. This would lead to a problem. Okay, this would lead to a problem if the regime is predominantly made of that. That's going to be an unstable regime in that sense. So therefore, this is why you need to do this assessments. So therefore, he should say, like do this, should be of the superior part, and they should take away. They should always take from the better part of the people, those who are to be share in the regime. So again, you should always take the people. If you're going to include them in the regime, and they're going to be participating, you should take always, particularly the oligarchical regime, because you need to get more people supporting it. You need to have the majority. That they are the biggest part. The next sort of oligarchy should be instituted in a similar way, with a slight tightening of the qualification for citizenship. So the first one is the most polity-like, or so-called most regime-like. It's similar to that first democracy. They're very similar to the first democracy and the first oligarchy are kind of like this. The assessments are low, but the idea is that in the oligarchy principle is that they should privilege the better sort of people, include the larger portion. In the oligarchic regime, the next level is what there should be a tightening, a slight tightening, right? As regards the sort that correspondence with the extreme short, the fourth one, and the last, right? The most powerful and tyrannical sort of oligarchy, to this degree that it is worse, it requires greater defense. In other words, this is the danger. This is the idea that there's dynastic oligarchy. The dynastic oligarchy with very few people. That usually only the certain fathers of the very well off. Not everyone. In other words, very dynastic. Who can son inherits from father, and that only of certain families, right? Only the very wealthy. And therefore, that's very small. This is the dangerous one. This is the worst. This requires the greatest defense, right? For just as bodies that are in a good state with respect to health, or ships that are in a fine, beautiful condition for a voyage and with respect to their crews, admit of more errors without being destroyed by them, while bodies that are diseased in a diseased conditions and ships with loosened timbers and a poor crew cannot bear upon even the small errors. So too in the case of regimes. The worst needs the most care and the most defense. In other words, it says of people's health and of ships, the you know healthy in that can what they can get a bad. They're going to make mistakes. People are going to make mistakes. He says on a condition where everything is fine, the beautiful crew is done like this, they can admit errors. Errors can happen. Mistakes can happen. Things can go wrong, but they don't destroy the regime. In other words, they're able to survive the bad without this regime being fault. So therefore, in other words, if it's a healthy or beautiful run, if it's healthy, stable, or beautiful, if the crew is beautiful, and the ship's in beautiful condition, bad things can still happen, but you survive them and you can preserve. But even now, but when things are bad, right? Even in other words, uh, small errors become death traps. Okay, small errors. So too in the case of regimes, the worsen needs the most defense. Democracies generally are preserved by their considerable population. So, what saves democracy is the populations. It is this is the antithesis of the sort of justice that is on the basis of merit. In other words, on merit, the best ones are taken. There, it's just that everyone's equal. In other words, but it is clear that oligarchy, on the contrary, obtained its preservation by being well arranged. In other words, just by allowing people to be preserved, and that the moderating it by giving merit. In other words, that the antithesis of this sort of justice is based on merit. So therefore, in other words, that what if democracy is that more should, everyone should be equal, they should by lot. Therefore, what you need to how you moderating that is by looking out for the best, looking out merit, not harming those who merit things. Okay, right? But in oligarchies, well, the opposite is that problem, right? And therefore, you need to have everything well arranged. Democracies get a pass here. Democracies, and actually, this is something that you look at in Book 5 about what destroys democracies. What's so interesting in Book 5, and particularly in Chapter 5, is the causes of revolution and the causes of democratic demise are few in number, whereas the causes and the different varieties of reasons why oligarchies and even our so-called aristocracies and so-called polities, and in other words, book the chapter on oligarchies and the chapters on so-called aristocracy and the regime called regime in book 5, chapter 7, yes, are much longer than the Democratic chapter. Why? Is because it's well, why? There's more things that, in other words, that democracy can be saved. In other words, the problem with even Democratic was not necessarily the people, it's the leaders, right? That's the even more interesting thing that he says in book 5, chapter 5. That it's mostly that the people, and I guess he repeats this idea that democracies are preserved by their populations, the people. That the people are big and stable. They should their populations, their considerable populations can moderate. I mean, not moderate them, but it prevents some things happening. But that's also the danger that when the population is too big, this also creates the demand of them to participate more, and that leads to that certain people get more and more say, particularly those least suited for it. Right? That's the whole weird thing that should be addressed. He's been quiet on. He hints at it, but doesn't really talk about it that much. But now what we have here is this idea that oligarchies need to be, particularly oligarchies, need to have good arrangement, obtain its preservation by being beautifully arranged, well arranged. And that is chapter 6. That's really it's a very short chapter. So let's stop here. Yeah, it's a very short chapter. So let's stop. Again, we'll stop here. It's a very quick chapter. We will continue next time. If you have any comments or questions, please put it below. Please put it below, and I will respond to it. I hope you see this. It's going to be a short one today, right? Because of this. If you have any interest about this, I should maybe say some more, but I won't. I'll just finish this. Like it if you liked it. If you dislike it, say why. But if you liked it, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague. So doing your social media, pass it around. Um, uh, uh, if you haven't liked it, say why. You can learn from this. Again, please put comments if you have any or questions you have. Um, if you want to follow me on social media, you can follow it below. If you wish to help the channel grow and continue doing this, it costs money. It's not as bad as I figured out something about something. It's not as bad as it was, but still, inflation and things help. Um, I know there's not a lot of you can follow on if you want to help Patreon, Subscribe Star. I understand there's not many people there, and you're gonna say, "Well, you haven't done anything." I'm sorry. This is the way. If you want to help, please do. Okay, it's the way you can do it. The way you can help is buy my book, Notebook for Aristotle's Politics, which is not a commentary of my other two books, and the book I'm working on now. Um, this is a kind of study guide, Cliff's Notes to Politics, Aristotle's Politics. Um, it is chapter by chapter with outlines, sometimes with graphs. I have a graph to kind of explain something, help you understand the text a little, to get a better grip on it as you go doing it. It also has stuff on some help on the questions or themes that you would deal with. So I think you might benefit from it. If you buy by Lulu, I get it's available on Amazon, all the major online sellers. You can get it there. But if you get it there, the bookstore gets a profit. If you buy by Lulu, now Lulu doesn't give you free shipping necessarily, but I will get the profit that Amazon or Barnes and Noble gets. Okay, so if you want to help, you can do that way directly. On that, I'll let you go. Return next to chapter 7, where this is where it is. Take care and bye bye. See you next tomorrow. Bye.